Welcome to Sygnia's webinar on the two-pot system, featuring Leanne Van Wyk, a distinguished expert in financial services law. With over 25 years of experience, Leanne has held leadership roles in key industry organizations. She's a frequent speaker at local and international conferences and is currently head of legal and compliance at Sygnia. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. We will make the recording and slides available on our website after the webinar. Please add your questions to the chat. Given the large number of delegates, we won't take questions live. However, we will address the most popular questions in our FAQ section on our website. So without further ado, here's Leanne.
Thank you so much, Ashka, for that very warm introduction. I appreciate it. And welcome to everybody. Welcome to our Sygnia customers, and welcome to those of you who are not Sygnia customers. It's great that you could join us today, and we're very happy to take you through the two-pot retirement system. We know that we will have people with all levels of understanding in relation to the two-pot system. So we're going to start off and build up your knowledge over the session today. Just know that we are recording at the moment. And as Ashka said, we will make the recording and the slides available. Perhaps also just to note that we cannot give you advice. If you need advice which takes into account your own circumstances, then if you could please contact your own financial advisor or your consultant. And then lastly, before we start, these are our own views and interpretations. So if, for example, you're not a Sygnia customer and you're with a different financial provider, they might have slightly different interpretations. Okay, so that's all the notices done. Let's start off with the two-pot system. Perhaps also to say thank you to those who sent in questions. We did modify our content, and we hope that your questions will be answered while we're going through the content today. So let's start here. Why do we need to hear about the two-pot system? Why is it important in relation to your retirement savings? So firstly, the two-pot system applies to you and your fund. It applies to occupational funds. So for example, your employer's pension and provident funds. It applies to umbrella funds, for example, like ours, the Sygnia umbrella funds, the SURF funds. It applies to retirement annuity funds, preservation, pension, and provident funds. And so whether, for example, you're on an occupational fund or an umbrella fund, as well as a retirement annuity or a preservation provident fund, it applies to all those types of funds. And we're going to have a look at them together and then separately towards the end of the session. And it's important to note that the two-pot system applies separately to separate funds. And as we go along, you will see what I mean by this. So, for example, the rules that apply to you getting money out of one fund apply separately to another fund. And you'll see what I mean as we get into the content today. So the two-pot system is going to change the way that benefits are paid out of funds. In addition, it creates new benefits. And then in addition to benefits being different and being paid differently, the taxation in relation to those benefits is also changing. Not completely, but there are changes. So we're going to deal with all of that today. You might be asking yourself, well, when does the two-pot system become effective? And the answer to that is 1 September 2024. Now, you might have heard over the last year or so, even going further back, that there was a lot of debate around when the two-pot system will start. But what we have seen is the major piece of legislation, which is the changes to the Income Tax Act. That piece of legislation has been enacted. There are also changes being made to the Pension Funds Act. That piece of legislation has been enacted, and we only really have one piece of legislation outstanding, which is going to make further changes to the Income Tax Act for two-pot. And you will see me mention that later in our session today, especially in relation to what I call older members, our over 55s. Not old members, older members. Okay. So if we go on to what are the main aims behind the two-pot system, I want to start off with this aim. So I don't know if you guys remember, but during COVID, there were a lot of calls for by members of retirement funds to say, look, we need some access to our cash. We are in emergency situations, we need cash. And at that stage, this conversation started in South Africa as it did around the rest of the world. Treasury then started to say, okay, well, how do we allow members of funds to access some of their cash while they are still employed? So that is the difference. Up till now, retirement funds could not pay a withdrawal benefit to a member while they were still in employment and part of the fund. Whereas one of the aims of the two-pot system is to allow members to take some cash out of the fund while they are still employed and part of the fund. Okay, so that is the first aim. Allow members to take a little bit of cash out of the fund while they're still employed. And really the mischief that is trying to be avoided here is that members resign from employment and come off the fund just to access their retirement funds. So that is what is trying to be avoided here. The other aim relates to preservation. And what I mean by that is keeping some money in a fund until retirement. So Treasury said, fine, we will allow you to take some cash out while you're still employed, but we are also going to require you as a member to keep some money in the fund until you retire. So that means if you leave employment, you cannot take everything in cash. I'm going to talk more about that today. Now, a lot of people know about the access to cash bit, right? So getting some money out the fund while they're still employed. But many people know much less about this other aim, which is keeping some money in the fund until retirement. And we're going to deal with both today. I'm often asked this question. So can my employer, the fund, or can I as a member decide to stay out of the two-pot system? And the answer to that is no. This is legislated. This is not something that's being foisted on you by your fund or by an administrator or by your employer. This is something that is required by legislation and we are required to do. So there's a couple of exceptions to that. One is a special category of older members of the fund. You will have a choice and we will talk about those specifically later in the session. And then just to note that the two-pot system does not apply to pensioners. So pensioners of a fund. Okay, so basically everyone's in except these few exceptions. So today what I'm going to cover is firstly, what are the pots? So we've heard about the two-pot system. What are these pots? Then I'm going to talk about how the pots pay out. So benefits, like retirement benefits, withdrawal benefits, etc. Then I'm going to talk about that very special category of member that I referred to earlier, the older members. I will deal with provident and pension funds, and I'm also going to deal with retirement annuity funds and preservation funds. So that's sort of the outline for what I'm going to do going forward. So if you see me talking about what comes into the pots and what the pots are, just understand I am going to get to benefits and the other parts of the two-pot system. Okay, right. So what I wanted to let you know is, remember I said to you there's that little piece of legislation that is still to come. And that piece of legislation is going to have an effect on how two-pot works, and especially in relation to older members. And you'll see me talking about that when we get to that section. So let's start off with, what are the pots? So let's start with a nice blank page, and let's talk through the pots. So the very first pot I want to tell you about is called the vested pot. Now this is very simple. All it is everything that you have saved in the fund already by the time two-pot comes in. So on the day before, so two-pot comes in on the 1st of September, the day before, on the 31st of August, your funds will look and see what you have saved as a member in the fund already, and that goes into your vested pot. It's everything you've saved already. And of course, that pot will continue also to earn investment return going forward. Right, so this vested pot, the idea behind it is that they don't want to mess too much with what you've already saved in the fund, and therefore they're putting that into the vested pot, and there are very similar rules going forward about what you can do with it as exist now. Okay, so vested pot, everything you've saved in the fund up to when two-pot starts. So that's the vested pot. Then we are adding 2 more pots. Okay, so you're basically, what you might know as your fund credit, for example, is going to be made up of 3 pots, all sitting in the fund. So the additional 2 pots are the savings pot and the retirement pot. Okay, and these 2 pots are made up from your contributions after the 1st of September. So everything before 1 September sitting in your vested pot. After the 1st of September, your savings pots and retirement pots start building up as your contributions come in. And we're going to talk much more about that. So if we look at these 2 pots and we think about those aims that I was talking about before, your savings pot is the pot that money is going to come out of while you are still in employment, okay, as well as when you take a benefit from the fund. So this is your cash portion of your benefit, right? This is the cash bit. Your retirement pot now, that relates to that other aim, the preservation aim. This is the pot that money will not come out of until you retire. Okay, so vested pot, everything before 1st of September, savings pot, your cash bit, retirement pot, the bit that stays there until you retire. I'm going to talk much more about this. Okay, I'm just giving you an overview now of the different pots. Right, so what happens if you're a member and you only start saving after the 1st of September? Right, so that means you don't get a vested pot. You don't have a vested pot because you haven't saved anything before the 1st of September. So it means if you come into a fund, you start saving for the first time from the 1st of September, you only have these 2 pots, the savings pot and the retirement pot. And that's why the system is called the 2-pot system and not the 3-pot system, because eventually everyone who has savings now already saved up will be out of the system, you know, in 40 years' time or whatever it is, and there will only be 2 pots left, right? So that is why it's called the 2-pot system, not the 3-pot system. Okay, so let's get back to our 3 pots, assuming we've got an amount saved up before the 31st of August, and then we've got 2 pots that are set up after the 1st of September. Let's look first at our contributions. So contributions that come into your fund after the 1st of September will be split between the savings pot and the retirement pot automatically. Now, the split is 1/3 of your contributions will go into the savings pot and 2/3 of your contributions will go into the retirement pot. Now, you will see on the slide here, I'm saying total net contributions per month after the 1st of September. Now, what I mean by that is contributions before they are split, your fees come off those contributions. So things like administration fees, any risk premiums related to the fund, etc., etc. So those costs come off first, and then the split is done to the two pots. Right, so we've got contributions coming into our two pots after the 1st of September, split 1/3 and 2/3. I often get asked this question as well. Can the employer, the fund, or the member change that percentage split between the savings pots and the retirement pot? And the answer to this is no, because that split is actually set under the Income Tax Act. So you can't, the fund can't change it in its rules. The members can't decide to do something else. It is set in law. That is the way it has to be split. Right, and then I want to talk about something you might have heard referred to as seeding. I call it a starting balance. So when this was all being discussed, people who were commenting on it, for example, trade unions as an example, said, well, we understand that the amounts will start building up in our savings pot and our retirement pot after the 1st of September. So our savings pot, which is the cash pot, if I can put it that way, will start building up. Every month, a little bit will come in and it will build up, okay, because with 1/3 of contributions. But can't we have a little bit of what we've saved already? So remember I said to you, what's in the vested pot is everything you've saved before two pot comes in. So everything as at the 31st of August. So can't we also have a little bit of that in our savings pot? Okay, and that is what is called seeding. So when I talk about seeding, what happens here is that an amount is moved out of your vested pot, so the amount you've saved already, come two pot, into your savings pot. So into the pot that you can take cash from. And this happens automatically. And it happens after the 1st of September. So once the fund knows what's in the fund for you, it will then start moving these amounts across. And that amount is 10% of what you've got in your vested pot, capped at 30,000 Rand. So 10% of what you've already saved before two pot comes in, capped maximum of 30,000 Rand. And I'm going to go through some examples here. So the idea is this gives you a starting balance in your savings pot. And then contributions come in every month and build up from that starting balance. So if you hear seeding, what it means is a starting balance in your savings pot from what you've already saved up in the fund. So here's some examples just to make it a bit clearer. So let's look at, I've given you at the top of the slide a reminder of how much goes across. 10% of everything you've saved as of 31 August, capped at 30,000. Okay. Now you will see here, I've said once off. So this only happens once. It never happens again. It only happens on the 1st of September. Okay, so that is when your starting balance is moved across into your savings pot and never happens again. Right, so if we look at example 1 on the left-hand side of the slide here. So in our example, on the 31st of August 2024, the day before two pot comes in, Jane, who's a member of the fund, has saved 100,000 Rand in the fund. So that is Jane, that's what Jane has saved already in the fund. 10% of 100,000 is 10,000 Rand. So Jane gets 10,000 Rand of what she saved already moved into her savings pot as a starting balance after the 1st of September. Okay, so you can see here that Jane is getting 10,000 Rand as a starting balance. Let's have a look at example 2. So in our second example, on the 31st of August, the day before two-pot starts, Sipho has 400,000 Rand saved in the fund already, right? That's what his fund credit is as at the 31st of August. Now, 10% of 400,000 Rand is 40,000 Rand. But remember, the 10% is capped at 30,000 Rand. Right? That's the maximum amount. So that means that Sipho will have 30,000 Rand transferred into his savings pot as a starting balance. So you can see Jane had 10,000, Sipho had 30,000. Okay, so what I want you to understand is that not everyone gets 30,000 Rand as a starting balance in their savings pot. It depends on what you have saved already when two-pot comes in on the 1st of September. No one will get more than 30,000 Rand. So if you have saved 300,000 Rand or more already in your fund, you'll get the 30,000. If you have saved less than 300,000 in your fund already, when two-pot comes in, you are going to get 10% of that, and you're going to get less than 30,000 Rand. Okay, so not everyone gets the full 30,000 Rand starting balance. And I don't think that every member out there actually understands that. I think that a lot of members simply think, oh, everyone gets 30,000 Rand, but that isn't the case. Okay, so I want you to understand that. Okay, let's go back to our pots. So just to visually show you, because I'm a picture person, you might be too, what we've been talking about. So here are our 3 pots. And remember, we talked about the contributions coming in every month to the pots, 1/3 to the savings pot, 2/3 to the retirement pot. And then we've also talked about this starting balance that goes over from your vested pot into your savings pot, which is 10% of your vested pot capped at 30,000 Rand. Okay, so that's a visual, it's a picture of what we've just spoken about. Right, I want to also let you know that what the legislation also allows you to do is to move money between pots, okay, but only in a very specific way. So you can move money from your vested pot and your savings pot into the retirement pot. Okay, so you can go vested pot to retirement pot, savings pot to retirement pot, never the other way around. Okay, so you can never move money in any other way. So for example, once it's in the retirement pot, it's there and it's stuck there and it can't come back out into the other pots. Okay. All right. Perhaps also to mention, and this is important, that these allocations between the pots, so vested pot to retirement pot, savings pot to retirement pot, can be done at any time at the member's discretion. Right, then I want to turn to fund return. So fund return will come into the fund just like it always had, no change, and be allocated to the 3 pots, okay, proportionately. So investment return comes in and is allocated to the 3 pots. So it's not allocated to, you know, 1 pot or 2 pots, it's allocated to all 3 pots. Obviously, in proportion to whatever you have in those pots. So yeah, your investment return comes in across all 3 pots. Now, I think that this question here is possibly becoming the most asked question that I'm being asked in relation to two-pot. And I know that a lot of you who are participating in our webinar today asked Sygnia the same question. It sent us in questions to ask this question, to say, well, if all my money is sitting in these 3 pots in the fund, what happens with my investments? So for example, is the savings pot invested in certain portfolios like cash and bonds? So conservative liquid investments, and then is my retirement pot more invested in things like equities and long-term investments? So is that how it works? And the answer to that is no. That is not how it works. Okay, I'm going to caveat that in a minute, but that's not how it works. So what happens is your investments that you have chosen, or your default investments, whatever the case may be, as we go into two-pot and over the 1st of September, when two-pot applies, your investments don't change, right? Your investments remain what they are. So if you have chosen specific investments, those will continue after the 1st of September. If you're in a default portfolio or any portfolio, that will simply continue as we go over the 1st of September. Okay. Now, the only caveat to that is that at some stage, funds may decide to have different investment portfolios sitting but behind different pots. However, my view on this is that this will only take place much later when we actually have built up more money sitting in the different pots. But at that stage, your fund would speak to you about this, communicate this to you, and tell you what your options are. And don't forget, you can always move money from your vested pot to your retirement pot, or your savings pot to your retirement pot. So I would not be too worried at this stage about investments changing, etc. What you might want to talk to your own provider about that, and I can confirm that from the SURF funds, Sygnia umbrella retirement funds, and our retail funds like our retirement annuity funds and preservation funds, there will be no change. So you'll simply go into two-pot with the investments you've chosen or on the default or whichever portfolio you're in. So I hope that puts your minds to rest a little bit on that point. Okay, so now I want to look at the next step. So we've looked at the pots and we've looked at how money comes into those pots. Now I want to look at something which you're probably more interested in, which is how are benefits paid from the pots? So how do these pots affect what we get as members? Right, so these are the benefits I'm going to look at today. I'm going to look at retirement benefits. Then I'm going to look at a very new benefit called a savings withdrawal benefit. Then I'm going to look at withdrawal benefits on exit. So when you leave employment, your normal pre-retirement withdrawal and death benefits. Okay, so I'm going to look at all of those. Let's take a look first at this very new statutory, which means by law, right, by legislation, benefit. So this is a new benefit that all funds that are subject to two-pot have to provide. Okay, and it's called a savings withdrawal benefit. A savings withdrawal benefit. And this is when, while you are still employed and still on the fund, you take money out of your savings pot. Okay, so this is a new benefit. This is not something that funds would have allowed before. So this is the part that many people out there have been quite excited for, because they are looking at perhaps taking a bit of money out of their retirement fund through their savings pot. Okay, so you don't have to leave employment or the fund to access this money. So to take a savings withdrawal benefit from your savings pot. And the maximum amount you can take out of your savings pot is whatever you have in your savings pot. Okay, so this is something that a lot of people are very confused about. The maximum you can take out of your savings pot doesn't relate to the 30,000. Okay, the 30,000 or whatever you get, your 10% comes into the savings pot, and then of course you get contributions on top of that that come in every month. So the amount in your savings pot increases. Right, so the amount you can take out of your savings pot while you're still employed is whatever is in your savings pot. That is the maximum amount. But it's very important that we think about our savings pot as an emergency fund, right? The fund will not require you to tell the fund what you want the money for, right? So you don't have to come and say, oh, you know, I have to pay my bond, or my car was crashed, or got to pay school fees, or, you know, whatever it is. You don't have to provide the reason. But for you, you need to understand that if you take money out of your savings pot, that is going to affect your retirement benefits and your other benefits going forward. And we will talk more about that as we go through this. So the idea is to think about this as an emergency fund. Now, this applies per fund. So if, for example, you are on the SURF umbrella fund and you've got a retirement annuity, for example, then you can take a savings withdrawal benefit from both funds, right? And the rules apply separately to each fund. Okay. Or, for example, you're on an occupational fund and you've got a retirement annuity fund, separate. Okay, so you can take a savings withdrawal benefit from each, and all the rules apply separately. Okay, so that's what I've got on the slide, applies per fund. What I want you to understand is that when the 1st of September rolls around, you don't have to take this money, right? In fact, it's better that you don't, because that will improve your retirement benefits. You don't have to take it. If you want to take it later, you take it later. It will still be there. So you don't have to say, oh, I better take it now in case it's not available to me later. No, that isn't the case. It will simply stay in your savings pot. Okay. Right, but there are some rules that apply when you're doing the savings withdrawal benefit. So when you're taking an amount out of your savings pot, there are some rules that apply. And I'm going to go through some of these today. Okay, so the first thing to note when you're looking to take money out of your savings pot and you're still employed is there is a minimum amount you can take out of your savings pot. So 2,000 Rand is the smallest amount you can take out. So if you've got 1,999 Rand in your savings pot, you can't take anything out. It's got to be at least 2,000 Rand that you take out of your savings pot. Okay. And we're going to talk about this, but that 2,000 Rand is before tax and fees, which I'm going to come back to. Excuse me while I take a sip of water. Okay. Some of the other rules that relate to taking a savings withdrawal benefit. Your savings withdrawal benefit, so taking money out of your savings pot while you're still employed, can be taken once every tax year. So not once annually, not once per year, once every tax year. So for example, you could take money out on the 1st of February from your savings pot, and then again on the 15th of March, because they're different tax years. Okay, so once every tax year. Then, if you do take money out of your savings pot while you're still employed, so you're taking a savings withdrawal benefit, that is going to be taxed. Okay, no money for free. So SARS is going to get their portion, and it's going to be taxed at your own marginal tax rate. That tax will be deducted from the amount that you've asked for before it is paid across to you. Okay, every fund has to do that by law. So it's very important that if you take money out of your savings pot while you are still employed, it's going to be taxed at your own marginal tax rate, which is a high rate. Okay. You may also have to pay a fee. So depending on which fund you are on, that fund will be able to tell you whether or not a fee is payable. So, for example, if you are on one of the Sygnia umbrella retirement funds, so one of the SURF funds, there is no fee payable. But, for example, if you are on a Sygnia retirement annuity fund or preservation fund, there is a fee payable. Okay, and every fund or administrator will be able to tell you what their fees are. Okay, so please bear that in mind. So say you take out 5,000 Rand, right? And your administration fee is 200 Rand, then you'll have 4,800 Rand left, 5,000 less the 200 fee, and the administrator will then apply for tax on that 4,800. When that tax comes in, they'll deduct it and then pay the remainder over to you. Okay, so I want you to be aware of this when you are looking at taking a savings withdrawal benefit. In addition, and this is something important for you to know, if you owe SARS, penalty or arrear tax, when you ask for savings withdrawal benefit and the fund applies for a tax directive from SARS to be told how much tax to deduct from your savings withdrawal benefit, if SARS at that stage can issue what's called an IT-88, which is basically an instruction to the fund to deduct any tax you owe SARS. Okay, so before you ask for a savings withdrawal benefit, you want to make sure that you don't have perhaps penalty and arrear tax owing that could eat into your savings withdrawal benefit, or perhaps you don't mind. But I'm letting you know that that could be deducted from your savings withdrawal benefits as well. So how long will this take so how long, you go to your fund and you say, right, or the fund's administrator, and you say, right, I want my savings withdrawal benefit. This is how much I want. How long will it take? Okay, so you're going to have to ask that of your fund, okay, because each fund has got its own turnaround times. But what I want to let you know is that I suspect, and this is my view, that in September, there's going to be a lot of savings withdrawal benefits requested. Okay, so there's going to be quite a few claims for this amount coming in. So I suspect that September, October-ish turnaround times are going to be longer than expected given the huge volumes. And then what I also expect is that tax directives, we will have to, so all funds will have to apply for tax directives, and that of course extends the turnaround time to get the benefit paid. Okay, so it could be anywhere between 7 days and 30 days. I don't know, it depends on your own administrator. Okay. The other thing I want to warn you about in relation to savings withdrawal benefits is this. Certain, what we call deductions, are allowed to come out of benefits that are paid to members. These are things like if the fund has given you a housing loan, or if it's guaranteed a housing loan that's been given to you, or you've got a divorce order or a maintenance order, the fund has to deduct that amount from any benefit that it pays to you. Okay. Now, with respect to these savings withdrawal benefits, the fund is going to have to ensure that if, for example, it's got one of these deductions, let's take a divorce order as an example. Say the fund has been ordered by a court to pay a divorce order to the member's ex-spouse. At that stage, the fund is going to have to say, right, I've got this divorce order and the member has asked for a savings withdrawal benefit. Do I have enough money in the fund to pay both? And if there's not enough money to pay the deduction, like the housing loan, divorce order, maintenance order, misconduct request, that type of thing. If it doesn't have enough money to pay that, it's going to have to refuse the request for a savings withdrawal benefit. So when you are filling in your form, however that is filled in, whether it's manual, on a portal, whatever it is, you are going to be asked questions about those sorts of things. Is there a divorce order pending, that type of thing. So you will see those questions coming through. And the reason is those types of things, those type of deductions have to be protected from a member taking money out the fund. they will always take preference. So I wanted to mention that to you. And on this slide, I've set out the sorts of deductions that could take preference over you receiving a savings withdrawal benefit. Existing divorce orders and maintenance orders, right, where the fund has been ordered to pay them. Pending divorce orders and maintenance orders. So these are ones that are still going through the courts, as an example. Now, what I want to warn you about here is that if there is a pending divorce order, so for example, summons has been issued, but the courts haven't handed the order down yet. If that is the case, the fund has to go to the member's the member's spouse, not ex yet, to the member's spouse and ask for consent to pay a savings withdrawal benefit to the member. Okay, so these are all little things that are complicating a savings withdrawal benefit claim if you have these things going on. Housing loans and guarantees for housing loans, again, this weighing up has to happen to make sure they are not compromised. Then, of course, there's this deduction, which allows for a member, an employer to come to the fund and say, look, there's been member misconduct at the employer. Can you please deduct the damages from the member's benefits? That's also a allowable deduction and something that the fund has to take into account when it's paying any benefit, including a savings withdrawal benefit. Okay, that is whether the order has actually been granted by a court for damages yet, or whether it's still in process. Okay, so what we need to understand is this: if we take a savings withdrawal benefit, some money out of our savings pot while we are still employed, a lot of people don't have enough money when they get to retirement to retire comfortably. Now, if you take retirement savings out of your savings pot, that is going to reduce the amount of your retirement benefit when you retire. So not only does it reduce the amount, but it also means you're going to be able to take less cash when you retire. Remember, after 1 September, your contributions go into these two pots, and the savings pot is your cash pot. Okay. And if you take a savings withdrawal benefit, that is income in your hands, and that could push you into a different or a higher tax bracket. So I want you to just take this into account when you're deciding whether you want to take money out of your savings pot in your fund. Right, let's switch now our focus a little bit. Remember, I talked about those two treasury aims. Well, the one was getting money out of your savings pot, which we've talked about quite a lot, but there was that other aim. Remember, there's part of your retirement savings that you can't take in cash until you retire. And that is the amount that is in your retirement pot. And remember, 2/3 of your contributions after 1 September are going into your retirement pot. Your retirement pot is only ever paid as an annuity to you. No cash comes out of the retirement pot. It is always paid as an annuity. And I'm going to go through this again in more detail, but please remember that your retirement pot stays there until retirement. So if you leave employment, you don't get paid to you in cash anything from your retirement pot. We'll go into that a little bit more detail. Right. So let's talk, we've talked about the savings withdrawal benefit. Let's move on to the next benefit now. And the next benefit I want to talk about is the withdrawal benefit. So this is the benefit that you receive from a pension or a provident fund when you leave employment, okay, before retirement. So this is your withdrawal benefit. Talking pension and provident funds now, and we'll talk about retirement annuity funds and preservation funds separately. Right, so if we look at our withdrawal benefit from a pension or provident fund, let's have a look at how the pots will pay out if you leave employment or if your employment is terminated in any way. Okay, so we've got our same three pots, our vested pot, our savings pot, and our retirement pot. Vested pot, remember everything you've saved before 1 September. Savings pots, that's 1/3 of your contributions going forward. Retirement pot, 2/3 of your contributions going forward. So if you withdraw, so your employment terminates, you can still take everything in your vested pot in cash if you want to. So that's up to you, but you can take everything in your vested pot in cash. Right. Remember what I said, they're trying to protect your current rights in your vested pot. If you left your pension or provident fund now because your employment terminated, you could take everything in cash. After the 1st of September, your vested pot, everything is allowed to be taken in cash. So you're now leaving employment, you can get cash from that. But what about the other pots? Your retirement pot, if you leave employment, you do not get any cash out of your retirement pot. Remember what I said. This pot must be saved in a fund. It doesn't have to be this fund, but in a fund until you retire. And only ever pays on retirement as an annuity. Okay, and I don't think that there are, I don't think all members out there understand this. You know, some members are perhaps more focused on the cash component and are not understanding that if they leave employment or their employment terminates for whichever reason, yes, you get everything in cash out of your vested pot, but you don't get any cash out of your retirement pot. And it's important to understand that. If we look at the savings pot, can we take cash out of our savings pot when we leave employment or employment terminates? The answer to that is maybe. Okay, so it's not automatic that you will get cash out of your savings pot. And this is what it depends on. So the idea behind your savings pot is that in any fund, right? So we're looking at all funds separately, but in a fund, the idea is that you should only be able to take what is in your savings pot once every tax year, whether you're leaving employment or not. Okay, so if you, as a member, have not taken anything out of your savings pot in the tax year that you leave employment, so you haven't taken anything from your savings pot, now leaving employment, you can take everything in your savings pot in cash, right? You haven't taken anything before in that tax year, therefore you can take everything in your savings pot in cash. But if in that same tax year that you are leaving employment, if in that same tax year you have, you have already taken an amount out of your savings pot, then you cannot take another withdrawal from your savings pot when you leave employment. Okay, so let's do an example. So say I take money out of my savings pot on the 1st of March 2025. And then in the same tax year, so say on the 1st of June, same tax year, I resign. Okay, that means when I resign, I cannot take more money out of my savings pot because I've already taken money out of my savings pot in that tax year. Okay, so that is important. There is only one exception to that. So if you've already taken money out your savings pot and you resign in the same tax year, nothing out your savings pot, except if you have a very small amount left in your savings pot. That is less than 2,000 Rand. So if you've got less than 2,000 Rand when you leave employment in your savings pot and you've taken an amount out your savings pot already in that tax year, you can still take that small amount, that amount less than 2,000 Rand out your savings pot. It's a little bit complicated. But really the idea is Treasury only want you to take one amount out of your savings pot in a year. Okay, so that is something to bear in mind if your employment is terminating. Let's have a look at the taxation of this. So you've got your 3 pots that accrue to you when your employment terminates. And we know that our vested pot we can take in cash, our savings pot we might be able to take in cash, our retirement pot we can't take in cash. So the idea is that you might take some in cash, and then the rest of the amount you will then have to decide, okay, am I leaving the rest of the amount that I can't take in cash? Am I leaving that on the fund, or am I moving it off the fund to another fund, as an example? Now, let's have a look at the taxation. So these 3 pots are going to be taxed in 3 different ways. So your vested pot is taxed as your withdrawal benefit would be now. Okay, so that then allows you to be taxed in terms of the lump sum withdrawal tax tables, where you've got your tax-free amount, your 27,500, that you can take tax-free. Okay, and then the rest is taxed at a sliding scale. So your vested pot is taxed in terms of those lump sum tax tables on withdrawal. Your savings pot is taxed at your marginal rate. So remember what I said, if you take an amount out of your savings pot before you retire, it is taxed at your marginal rate. Same thing happens when you withdraw from employment. Then thirdly, your retirement pot, remember what I said, this can't be taken in cash, so it's either going to stay on the fund or you're going to transfer it on a tax-free basis or tax-neutral basis off the fund to another fund. Okay. Now, I want to just, so you will see here that you could get cash out of your vested pot and your savings pot, and you could have an amount that you can't take in cash from your retirement pot and perhaps your savings pot. Now, when you are deciding, after you've decided what you've taken in cash, when you're deciding whether to take an amount and leave it on the fund, so whatever you've got left in your pots after taking cash, are you going to leave it on the fund or are you going to transfer it off? There are some fairly funny rules that apply because of the interaction in the Income Tax Act between the second schedule, to get technical, and this new rule that's been introduced into the Income Tax Act that I call the Follow Me rule, which means that once you've taken your cash, your pots must follow each other. So once you've decided you've taken some cash, then your pots must either stay on the fund or your pots must move off. You can't leave one pot on the fund and move another one off the fund. Okay. Now, if you, I've put it on the slide here, this is slightly technical and you will see it in your claim forms when you submit a withdrawal claim to the fund. But if you take only a part of your vested pot in cash, you can take it all in cash, but if you decide, no, I'm only going to take a part of it in cash, then you must transfer the rest, the remaining amount of cash in your vested pot off the fund and transfer your other pots off as well. However, if you take your vested pot all in cash, you say, no, I want everything in my vested pot in cash, then you can say, right, I want my other pots, so my savings pot and my retirement pot, you can choose. Either they can stay on the fund or you can transfer them off. So a bit of some, some technicalities here and some detail, but you will pick this up in your claim form when you submit your claim form. Okay, so this is the other question I often get asked. Okay, yes, I understand this is what happens when my employment is terminates. And I get some cash and I get some that must be transferred off the fund or left on the fund and can't be taken in cash. I get that. But what if I'm retrenched? Because then does the same thing apply? Does that mean I can't take any cash out of my retirement pot, which I might need? And the answer to that is the benefit's exactly the same, however your employment terminates, whether you're retrenched or not. So retrenchment, dismissal, resignation, whatever it is, They're all treated the same for your retirement benefit. From your retirement benefits point of view when it comes to withdrawal. Okay, so this is something that Treasury is going to relook, but I suspect that any change that might come on this will only happen in about 2026. That's my guess, in about March 2026, because it has to go through a change to legislation. And it could be that Treasury look at this and say, well, actually, we think that you should get a bit of your retirement pot when you're retrenched. But at the moment, please understand that this is what applies to all terminations of employment, including retrenchments. Okay. Right. The next thing I want to move to is retirement. So I want to look at how the pots pay out on retirement. And here I'm going to look at pension, provident, and retirement annuity funds all together. The simple answer is on retirement, you're going to get a benefit partly as an annuity and partly in cash. Let's go through it in a little bit more detail. So how do our pots pay out on retirement? Okay, so here's our three pots, same three pots. How are they going to pay to us when we actually retire from the fund? Okay, the first thing to note is that on your savings pot, everything in your savings pot when you get to retirement can be paid to you in cash. If you don't want to take it all in cash, that's up to you. You can add what you don't want to take in cash to your annuity that you will get from the fund. So remember, your retirement benefits going to pay partly in cash, partly as an annuity. No longer will we have a situation where, for example, provident funds pay out completely in cash. So one exception to that, that's older members. We'll talk about that later. Okay, for everyone else, your savings pot, everything allowed to be taken in cash if that is what you want. Your retirement pot, when you retire, completely paid as an annuity. But there's no portion of your retirement pot that is paid in cash. Everything from your retirement pot will be paid to you from the fund as an annuity, right? Whether that's paid from the fund or from an insurer, wherever the case may be. Everything is paid as an annuity. Your vested pot is slightly more complicated. Okay, so I'm going to come back to your vested pot. Your vested pot is going to be paid to you partly as an annuity and partly as cash. All right, and I'm going to come back to that and explain it in a bit more detail. For that, I want to say to you that the de minimis amount still applies. So what is that piece of Latin now? I hear you asking. So de minimis is just Latin for minimum. So Treasury and government doesn't want to force you to take a very small retirement benefit as an annuity. So in the Income Tax Act, they put in this amount, and if your retirement benefit is below that amount, doesn't matter what this says, you can take it all in cash. Right? You don't have to annuitize a portion of it. That will still apply going forward, but it will apply slightly differently. And I'll go through that in a minute too. Your retirement benefit will be taxed exactly as it is now, which means that you will get a tax-free amount, and the rest is going to be taxed in terms of a sliding scale. So whatever cash you are taking out of your fund on retirement, so that could be your savings pot and a bit out your vested pot, that will be taxed in terms of retirement fund lump sum tax tables. So you'll get, currently, you could get 550,000 maximum as your tax-free amount, and the rest is taxed in terms of a sliding scale. Now remember that 550,000 changes in legislation from time to time, but it's also an aggregated amount. Basically, what that means is if you take tax-free amounts before that, for example, in relation to withdrawal benefits or something like that, that all counts to how much you get as a tax-free amount when you retire. Okay, so that's why I say maximum. 550,000. Okay, so let's get back to this more complicated vested pot. Savings pot and cash, retirement pot, annuity. What about this vested pot? Okay, so the way I see this vested pot is I look at it as having layers. So there are 2 layers that sit in this vested pot. Okay, and these layers are called the vested amount and the non-vested amount. Okay. Now, if you are in a pension fund, you only have the top layer, the non-vested amount. So you can completely ignore the bottom layer if you're in a pension fund. But if you are in a provident fund, then you're going to have possibly both layers. Okay. If you are in a retirement annuity fund, again, you'll probably not have that bottom layer. You'll just have the top layer. Okay, now these 2 layers that sit in the provident fund relate to vesting and non-vesting amounts. So it's very confusing wording, but your vested pot has 2 layers, a vested amount and a non-vested amount, right? And when you retire, your administrator will tell you how much you can take as an annuity, how much in cash, and often that is determined to some extent by these layers sitting in this vested pot. Now, these layers relate to these layers relate to when you made contributions into this fund. Okay, so if you're sitting in a provident fund, all your contributions before 1 March 2021 are vested. So it sits in the vested layer. All your contributions before 1 March 2021 and investment return on that sit in the vested layer. And if you are a member of a provident fund, still on the same provident fund, and you were at 1 March 2021, you were 55 years or older, then everything will sit in that vested layer for you. So your whole retirement savings. Okay, so you're going to have, to simplify it, a vested and a non-vested layer in your vested pot. Now, if you look at this, your vested layer in your vested pot, you can take completely in cash. Okay. Whereas your non-vested layer in your vested pot, 1/3 in cash, 2/3 as an annuity. Okay. So if you have these 2 layers, for example, you're in a provident fund, then your cash is going to come from your savings pot and from the 1/3 of your non-vested layer in your vested pot. Whereas your annuity is going to come from your retirement pot and from your 2/3 of your non-vested layer. Okay, so you're going to get this cash, a bit of cash from your vested pot and out of your savings pot, and some of your vested pot will have to be annuitized as well as your retirement pot. Okay, so it sounds very complicated, and it is a little bit complicated, but yes, there is this way of working out what you're allowed to take in cash and what you're allowed to take as an annuity. Okay. Remember I mentioned that the Treasury doesn't want to force you to take a very small retirement benefit as an annuity. So this is how you work out whether you can take everything in cash. What you do is you add up your retirement pot to 2/3 of the non-vested layer in your vested pot. If that is less than 165,000 Rand, then you can take everything in cash. Okay, so if you're on a provident fund, you're going to add up what's in your retirement pot and 2/3 of the non-vested layer in your vested pot. And if that is below 165,000 Rand, you can take everything in cash. Okay. If you're on a pension fund, it's a bit simpler because you don't have this bottom vested layer. You will only have that top non-vested layer. So there, same thing. You add what's in your retirement pot to 2/3 of what's in your vested pot. That's below 165,000. Then you're good to go. You can take everything in cash. Okay, so that de minimis amount applies. Now, what I want you to notice on this slide is that, remember I said to you, everything is going to be taxed in terms of the retirement fund lump sum tax tables, which gives you that 550,000 currently tax-free. That means if you leave your savings pot in the fund until you retire, you might get a large portion of it or all of it tax-free. That is your reward from Treasury for keeping your savings pot in the fund until you retire. So to recap the point I'm making, if you take money out of your savings pot before you retire, you're going to be taxed at your marginal rate. If you leave all your savings in your savings pot, if you've got money left in your savings pot when you retire, that then can be dealt with in terms of giving you some of it or all of it tax-free. Okay, so that's your reward for leaving money in your savings pot until you retire. So that's important to know. Okay, so that is retirement. On this slide, I've simply dealt with pension funds and retirement annuity funds, which are slightly simpler, but I think I already dealt with that in the previous slide. Okay, but I have given it to you in this slide, so if you want to refer to it, you can always come back to it. Let's talk about a death benefit now. So this is another benefit that has been paid from the fund. Right, now this applies to all types of funds. It's going to, so pension, provident, retirement annuity funds, preservation funds, etc. So it doesn't change. So death benefits after two-pot are the same as death benefits before two-pot. And I'm talking here about your lump sum, if you know the terminology, section 37C, so your lump sum death benefits that are payable from the fund. Now, those will work the same before two-pot as after two-pot. So now, if this type of benefit arises in the fund, the beneficiary, so the member's beneficiary, so the wife or the child, whoever it is, once the fund has decided how much they're allocating to who, at that stage, the beneficiary can then say, yes, I want it all in cash, or no, pay me an annuity. Okay, exactly the same after two-pot. They've got the same option. They can say, yes, I want it all in cash, or no, pay it to me as an annuity. So no big changes there. And taxed as it is now in terms of the retirement fund lump sum tax table. So again, no changes there. Okay, just a note on defined benefit funds before I move more onto retail funds. So on defined benefit funds, yes, two-pot applies to defined benefit funds, whether it's a defined benefit pension fund or a defined benefit provident fund. It still applies. It just applies in a slightly different way. So instead of talking about contributions being split 1/3, 2/3, etc., the reference will be to pensionable service being split. Okay, because remember, on a defined benefit fund, your benefit relates to your pensionable service and not to the contributions to the fund. There's a formula that takes into account pensionable service. Okay, so on a defined benefit fund, very similar working in relation to two-pot, but the actuaries are going to be doing a lot more work because they're going to be working out how much goes into each pot, how much you can take as a savings withdrawal benefit, etc., how much you can take as benefits all related to your pensionable service. Sometimes funds, for example, one of the funds that springs to my mind is the Government Employees Pension Fund, which is a defined benefit fund. Their benefits don't relate to pensionable service. So in that case, they will agree some sort of proxy for pensionable service with the FSCA, but it's two-pot still applies to them and will be applied. I don't want to deal too much with defined benefit funds because I suspect that many of you who've joined the session today are not sitting on a defined benefit fund. I'd like now to move to retail funds, and by that I mean retirement annuity funds and preservation funds. So let's have a look at how these work. Okay, so let's start with retirement annuity funds. Now, those of you who are on a retirement annuity fund, you will know that you are on a retirement annuity fund. It could be the Sygnia retirement annuity fund or by a different provider, whoever it is. When I'm talking about retirement annuity funds here, I'm not referring to something called a legacy retirement annuity fund. Those are very old retirement annuity funds with very special rules around them. And those on application to the authority are going to be exempted from two-pot. But if you are on a legacy retirement annuity fund, I'm pretty sure the retirement annuity fund will tell you that. Just for those people who are on the Sygnia retirement annuity fund, it's not a legacy retirement annuity fund. So two-pot applies to it. There are only a few legacy retirement annuity funds. Okay, so leaving that beside, so we also know that in a retirement annuity fund, unlike a pension or provident fund, there are no withdrawal benefits paid from a retirement annuity fund when you leave employment. Right? So that's one of the differences. And there is no change to that. So if you leave employment, you still won't get a benefit from your retirement annuity fund. However, everything that relates to two-pot is going to be applied to a retirement annuity fund. So it's going to work the same as what I have explained all along. Okay, 1/3, 2/3 split going to a new savings and retirement pot for you. All your benefits you've saved up already, sitting in a vested pot. All of that applies exactly the same, with one exception. Okay, so the one exception is that in a retirement annuity fund, you as a member, so one member in one retirement annuity fund, you as a member may have different contracts. You might be here it being referred to as policies or accounts. You might have different contracts, policies, or accounts in the same retirement annuity fund. If that is the case, then you apply two-pot per contract, policy or account, whatever the wording is used. Okay, so that means if you've got different contracts or accounts or policies in the same retirement annuity fund, you apply two-pot per contract. Okay, so that means that we run your contracts or accounts or policies or different ones separately for two-pot purposes within the same retirement annuity fund. Okay, so that means you get 3 separate starting balances, 3 separate savings pots. Okay, so your pots work separately per your account. Okay, so if you have, for example, 2 policies in the same retirement annuity fund, you'll get 2 starting balances, 2 savings pots, as an example. And it also means that you can take 2 savings withdrawal benefits per income tax year. Okay, so that is one way that retirement annuity funds work differently for two-pot than all other funds. Okay, so you'll get your 3 pots still. That might be applied per contract, but you'll get your 3 pots in your retirement annuity fund. You'll get your same starting balance. Once off starting balance on the 1st of September, it's exactly the same amount, 10%, what you've saved up already, capped at 30,000. Same amount. You will get savings withdrawals. So for the first time, really, a retirement annuity fund will be paying cash out to its members, where your member asks for a savings withdrawal benefit. Okay, so there are very few instances where a retirement annuity fund will pay money out of the fund before the member gets to age 55. There's a few, like immigration, disability, very small amounts. But besides from that, your money is usually in that retirement annuity fund until you're 55. But now you get a savings pot in your retirement annuity fund that you can take savings withdrawal benefits from, like all other funds. Okay, then I don't know if you're aware of that minimum amount. So if your retirement annuity fund is worth a small amount, that is 15,000 Rand or less, you can take your money out of that retirement annuity fund. Very simply put, there is more nuance to it, but very simply put. Now, it's likely that when they're calculating that 15,000 Rand, they will add up what is in your 3 pots. So that is still being looked at by SARS and by industry, but it's very likely that when they're determining how much money you've got in your fund to see whether you are below this 15,000 Rand limit, they will look at what's in all 3 pots. Okay, then on retirement, retirement works on a retirement annuity fund in exactly the same way as I explained it before. You remember there's a slide dealing with retirement from retirement annuity funds. So basically you get your the amount out of your savings pot in cash. Your retirement pot is paid as an annuity, and your vested pot will be paid 1/3 cash and 2/3 as an annuity. Okay, so your cash comes from your savings pot and your vested pot, 1/3. And then your annuity comes from your retirement pot and 2/3 of your vested pot. Okay, so slightly more simple than a provident fund. Just that, remember that you can retire per policy or per account in your retirement annuity fund if you have more than one, and your de minimis is cumulative. So once you've retired from your first policy or account, the next time you retire from the next contract, the de minimis accumulates. So it's not applied per retirement, per account. So I just thought I'd mention that. It might be useful to know. Okay, so that is retirement annuity funds. 2-pot applies. Suddenly you get a savings withdrawal benefit that you can take from retirement annuity funds. That is the good news. If you are looking for cash on retirement, you're going to get your retirement pot as an annuity, savings pot is cash, and your vested pot will be 1/3 cash, 2/3 annuity. I hope that helps. Let's have a look at preservation funds now. So the other type of retail funds. So I'm now talking about preservation pension funds, preservation provident funds. Okay, so let's have a look at them. The first thing I want to deal with is if you are already a member of a preservation fund. So 1 September rolls by, you're already in a preservation fund. So for example, that would apply to me. Number of years ago, I left an employer long time ago where I moved my retirement fund money into a preservation fund. So come 1 September, I am going to be someone who has is already a member of a preservation fund come the 1st of September. So how will my benefits be dealt with? How will your benefits be dealt with if you are already a member of a preservation fund on the 1st of September? So when we transferred our money to the preservation fund, there were no pots, right? Pots only come in on the 1st of September. So there weren't any pots. So our money was simply transferred into the preservation fund. On the 1st of September, if we are sitting in a preservation fund and if we have not taken our once-off withdrawal from a preservation fund, remember, currently you can take a once-off withdrawal from your preservation fund, either the whole amount or a partial amount. Okay, so how does that work after 2-pot comes in? So you're a member of a preservation fund already on the 1st of September, and you haven't taken your once-off withdrawal first yet. So what will happen is everything that you've already got in your preservation fund will be put into your vested pot come 1 September. So everything that we've got in our preservation funds will just be put into that vested pot. That's where it sits. And then this seeding event will happen. So same amount as we have talked about before, 10% of what we already had in our preservation fund come 1 September, subject to this cap of 30,000, will be transferred from our vested pot or allocated from our vested pot into our savings pot. So suddenly now in our preservation fund that we've always been a member of, we have a vested pot plus a savings pot. Okay, so Now I'm a member, I've got a vested pot and a savings pot. I can still, if I haven't taken my once-off withdrawal, I can still take my once-off withdrawal, and I don't lose it. I can still take it, but I take it from what is sitting in my vested pot. And remember, what is in my vested pot? Everything that was in my pres fund, come two pot, excluding what has gone to my savings pot as a starting balance. Okay, so that means my once-off amount that I'm allowed to take out of my vested pot, I can still take that out, and it will still be taxed the same as it was before in terms of the withdrawal lump sum tax tables. Right, so I can take my once-off amount, all or partial, and it'll be taxed as it was before in terms of the withdrawal lump sum tax tables. So I get a tax-free amount and the rest is taxed. Then if you don't take everything out of your vested pot, so your once-off withdrawal is a partial one, you're not taking everything, then everything else in your vested pot must stay there until you retire. Okay. Now, if we look, remember what I said to you, come 1 September, you're already in a pres fund, the starting balance moves into your savings pot. 10% of what you had in your pres fund, subject to the 30,000 cap. And that amount you can take like anyone else can take on any other type of fund. You can decide, right, I want to take it out, so I'm going to leave it there, whatever the case may be. Same rules apply. You can take it once every tax year. The minimum is 2,000 Rand, etc., etc. Okay, so basically you get perhaps the best way to look at it is another bite at the cherry. So now it's not just off the once-off withdrawal, but you've got this amount in the savings pot that you can take out. However, it's important to note that if you take an amount out of your savings pot in your preservation fund, it's going to be taxed at your marginal rate. If you take it out pre-retirement, it's going to be taxed at your marginal rate. Leave it there until retirement, and again, it's then taxed in terms of retirement fund lump sum tax tables, which means you get a tax-free amount. Okay. So I want you to be very aware of this. The only way you could have an amount in your retirement pot if you are already a preservation fund member is if you decide you want to put some money from your savings pot, your vested pot, into your retirement pot. Okay, that's the only way you would ever have money sitting in your retirement pot. It would be your decision to put it there, and then you know, okay, you can't touch that until you retire. But that would probably be quite unusual for you to do that. All right, so that's if you are currently a preservation fund member. It's not a huge amount to worry about. You can still take your once-off withdrawal. You will, however, get a seeded amount put into a savings pot that you can take in cash, and that will be taxed at your marginal rate. Okay, let's talk about now where you move to a preservation fund after the 1st of September. Okay, so if we look at my picture here, I do love pictures. If we look at our picture, on the left is our retirement fund, right? We're sitting in a retirement fund after the 1st of September 2024. We're in a retirement fund. And after the 1st of September, sometime, we decide, okay, we want to move our money from the retirement fund into the preservation fund. So for example, you leave employment and you say, right, I don't want cash. I'm moving my money into a preservation fund. Okay. So at that stage, you would have pots in your retirement fund because now it's after the 1st of September. So you would have pots, and your transfer is very simple. It happens pot to pot. So whatever pots you have in your retirement fund, you're going to move over and have in your preservation fund. And you simply move that amount pot to pot. Okay, so it means that once you've moved, you will then have 3 pots sitting in your preservation fund as well: a vested pot, a retirement pot, and a savings pot. And works exactly the same. You can take savings withdrawal benefits like everyone else from your savings pot in your preservation fund, and it'll get taxed at your marginal rate. Your retirement pot in your preservation fund must stay there until you retire. And your vested pot, that is where you can take your once-off withdrawal from, and that will be taxed in terms of your withdrawal lump sum tax tables. Okay, and if you don't take it all, the rest must stay there until you retire. Okay, so I hope that is a bit clearer. I've tried to put it in picture form so that if you don't remember what I said, you can go back and just look at the pictures, and hopefully that will clarify it in your mind. Okay. I'm now going to move on to that special category of member that I talked about before, which is the older members of the fund. So when I refer to older members, this is who I mean. And it's important to understand whether you fall into this category or you don't. Okay. So when I'm referring to an older member, I mean a Provident Fund member on the 1st of March 2021. So you were a member of the Surf Provident Fund, or your Occupational Provident Fund, or some other, an umbrella Provident Fund, doesn't matter. It was a Provident Fund. And you were a member of that fund on 1 March 2021. Plus, on that same date, 1 March 2021, you were 55 years or older. So by now, minimum, you'd be about 58. Okay. Provident Fund member on 1 March 2021 and 55 years or older on that date. Plus, you're still a member of that same Provident Fund you were a member of on the 1st of March 2021. If you can answer, Leanne, yes, yes, and yes to this, then you fall in this category. Okay. If you can't answer if it's yes, yes, no, you don't fall into this category. So you have to comply with all 3 requirements. Provident Fund member, 1 March 2021, and I'm still on that same fund, okay? And I was 55 or older on that date, 1 March 2021. Okay. If you've transferred off the fund, the Provident Fund that you're a member of on 1 March 2021, this doesn't apply to you. Because then it's yes, yes, no. Okay, so it's got to be yes and yes and yes. And then you fall within this category. Okay, so it's important to understand whether you do or you don't. Right, so if you do fall within this category, then you have choice, right? So your choice is you can choose whether you want to be in the 2-pot system or you don't want to be in the 2-pot system. It's up to you to choose that. Not up to your fund, not up to your employer, anybody else. It's up to you. You can decide, yes, I want to be part of the 2-pot system, or no, I don't. Okay. Now, the default is that you are, as an older member, out of the 2-pot system. Okay, so if you do nothing as an older member in this category, if you do nothing, you will automatically not be in the 2-pot system. You have to make a choice actively to be in the 2-pot system. So you have to go to the administrator of the fund and say, yes, me, please, I want to be part of the 2-pot system, in which case they'll give you a form to fill in and you'll opt in. Okay, so that's what they mean by opting in, okay, which means you saying to the fund, yes, I want to be part of the 2-pot system. If you say nothing, if you do nothing, you're out. Now, a lot of people say to me, well, what about pension fund members who are older? This doesn't apply to pension fund members. Okay. And the reason for that is that what they are trying to do here is protect rights that Provident Fund members have already and that pension fund members don't have in relation to how much money can be taken on retirement in cash and how much can be taken as an annuity. So this does not apply to pension fund members who already have an annuity requirement on retirement. Okay, so that is just an explanation about why it applies to Provident Fund members in this category and not pension fund members. Okay, so you in this category, you can choose. I want to be in or out of two-pot. Please note that when you make that choice, it's irrevocable, which means you can't go back on it. So you get a once-off choice. So you can't go in, out, in, out, in, out. Once-off choice to belong to the two-pot system or not in your fund. Okay. If you belong to 2 funds, then obviously you can make that choice per fund. Okay. But for that, for one fund, one choice and one option. Yes, I want to be part of the two-pot system, then you go in. Okay, so let's have a look at this. When can you make this choice? Okay, so you can start thinking about it now. Come 1 September, you can even start filling in forms if you want to, but come 1 September, you can make this choice to say, yes, I want to opt into the two-pot system. Now, remember I said to you, there is still a little bit of law that is coming, a bit of legislation coming on two-pot, and it affects older members. So what I've got on this slide is in the black is the current law in the Income Tax Act. In the red is what we think is coming in terms of that change to the Income Tax Act. Okay, so in terms of current law, you can make that opt-in choice at any time, right? It can be any time before you retire. But we think that is going to be narrowed down to a 1-year period where you will have 1 year from the 1st of September to decide whether you're going to opt in. Now, you might be saying to me, Leanne, well, my fund hasn't told me about this 1-year period. You know, they've just said I can opt in. Okay, that is because some funds have chosen to communicate what is currently in the law, which is you can opt in at any time. And other funds have chosen to provide you with the 1-year option because they know it's coming in the Income Tax Act. Right? They know that that change is going to be made. So you might see funds saying different things. So watch out for this. If you are going to opt in, at the moment it says opt in at any time, but we think that's going to be narrowed down to a 1-year period from the 1st of September 2024. Right, so you say, right, I want to opt in. That means that from the date that you opt in, two-pot applies to you. So that means you get your vested pot, where everything you've built up in the fund is put in there, and then you get your savings pot and your retirement pot, and your ongoing contributions are split. From the moment you opt in, everything I've been talking about on two-pot is going to apply to you. Okay. So the question I can hear you asking is, okay, that means I get a starting balance in my savings pot, right? Me as an older member, I decide to opt in, I get a starting balance. Okay, yes, that is correct. If you opt into two-pot, you will also get a starting balance in your savings pot. Okay, and that starting balance, depending on which legislation applies again, in terms of current legislation, will be calculated like every other member on the 31st of August for you. So they'll look to see, what have you got in the fund on the 31st of August? Okay, it's 10% of that capped at 30,000. That's your starting balance in the savings pot. Okay. However, in terms of legislation that's coming, what we know is that that legislation says that your starting balance, if you opt in, will depend on when you opt in. And it'll be calculated not at the 31st of August, but in the month that you opt in. So say you opt in on the 1st of February next year, your starting balance will be calculated at the end of the month you opt in. So the end of February. The 28th of Feb, they'll calculate what's in your vested pot, what you've saved already, and your 10% subject to 30,000 will be calculated on that day. So you can see here again, there might be differences in what's been communicated to you. And they might have just simply said to you, you can opt in at any time and your starting balance will be calculated on the 31st of August, like everyone else. Or they're going to say, right, you can opt in, you've got a year to opt in, and your starting balance will be calculated when you opt in. Okay, so depending, and I don't think anything is strictly right or wrong. Different providers are going to want to communicate it in different ways. Okay, what the current law says is opt in at any time, starting balance on the 31st of August calculation. But we know what's coming, which is opt in within a 1-year period, and your starting balance be calculated when you opt in. Okay, so you'll have to just see what's in your communication, but understand this is what is coming. Same thing, we've already spoken about this. Your seeded amount when you opt in will be 10% calculated, capped at 30,000. Now, don't forget what I said in relation to the 3 requirements, which I've repeated in the blue blocks at the bottom of this page. So you've got to comply with all 3 requirements. So if you're in a provident fund and you have decided, no, I'm not opting into 2 pots, I'm staying where I am, I'm good. If you transfer off that provident fund that you were a member of on the 1st of March 2021, if you transfer off it, you will automatically be in 2 pots when you get into your new fund. Okay, why? Because you don't comply with the 3rd requirement. You're not still a member of the same provident fund you were on 1 March 2021. So transfer off that fund and you will then be in 2 pot automatically. Okay, so what I wanted to look at now, and I'm getting towards the end of the presentation, I'm sure you'll be happy to hear. It's been a lot of technical stuff. But I just want to talk about what happens to older members if they opt in or if they stay out of the 2 pot. So that's what I've got on this slide. So let's start off with you're an older member, you fall in those categories, and you say, I'm staying out of the 2 pot system, right? You don't have to do anything. You'll automatically be out of the 2 pot system. So that means that everything will stay exactly the same as it is now for you. Your contributions will go into the vested pot. You're the only type of member who can make contributions to the vested pot after the 1st of September. Your contributions will go into the vested pot. Nothing will change. You're still, as a provident fund member, you'll still be able to take full cash out when your employment terminates. And when you get to retirement, again, you will still be able to take your whole amount in cash. Okay, so nothing will change for you. But as part of that, what I said, nothing will change for you, you won't get a savings pot because you're not in the 2 pot system. So that means that other members will be able to take money out of their savings pot while they're still in employment. You won't. Okay, so the quid pro quo for nothing changing for you is that you don't get a savings pot, and it means you can't take cash out of the fund while you are still employed. Okay, so that's if you stay out of the 2 pot system. Let's now look at if you are in the 2 pot system. So if you say, as an older member in those categories, you say, right, I am opting into the 2 pot system. Fill in the form and you're in. At that stage, once you've made that election to opt in, at that stage, you will then get your ongoing contributions split between a savings pot and a retirement pot, like everyone else. 1/3 to the savings pot, 2/3 to the retirement pot. Okay, so that means that you can take money out of the fund while you're still employed. You can take money out of your savings pot while you're still employed. So as that amount builds up, you'll be able to take it out. Okay, but it also means you have a retirement pot. So as a provident fund member, and an older member, when you get to retirement, there's going to be a portion of your retirement benefit that you have to take as an annuity. Whereas if you were out of the 2 pot system, you could have taken it all in cash because you are an older member. Okay, so that is the difference. And I think that sometimes it boils down to, is it more important that I want cash now while I'm still in employment, in which case I'm going to opt in to 2 pot? Or Is it more important that I take more cash when I retire, in which case you will probably stay out of the two-pot system? But this is a very individual decision. Depends on your own circumstances. It depends on the de minimis amount. Depends if you're moving funds. There's a whole lot of things that you need to take into account. I cannot give you advice on that. You will need to speak to your own financial advisor to get advice on that. Okay, so please do that. Right, this is just a pictorial description of how older members will be treated once they opt into two-pot. So they will get their same seeding amount or starting balance in their savings pot, and their contributions after that will be split between the savings pot and the retirement pot, plus anything that they have saved up before. Their opt-in will be sitting in the vested pot for them. Okay, so it then starts to work exactly as we've described previously for other members, because now you as an older member have opted in. Okay, so quite a lot to think about for our older members who are sitting in a fund now and deciding whether they should become part of the two-pot system or not. Right, I think that you're going to be happy to hear that I've come to the end of my presentation. And I really hope that we have given you some insight into the two-pot system. I know that you know, some people will have more expertise on this than others, and some people will understand more than others. But I hope that whoever you are, you have more understanding now than before you started listening to me. So from Sygnia, we say thank you very much for joining us, and it was really wonderful to have you with us. And we hope that you got something out of it. So thank you very much, and go well today and enjoy the rest of your week.